So, ladies and gentlemen, in his opening statement, Attorney Nelson said to you, one of the things you're going to have to determine is what happened on July 30th, 2022. Well, what happened on July 30th, 2022 is a group of drunk teenagers led by the ringleader, Juwan Cockfield, saw an opportunity to torment a man who was by himself. They taunted him. They called him names like raper and pedophile and predator. They did this for no legitimate purpose. When they did this, their yelling and carrying on, it attracted the attention of another group, right? Led by Madison Cohen and Dante Carlson. 6 drunk teenagers quickly turned into 13. 13 against 1. They got in his face. They screamed at him. They called him names. They swore at him. They put their hands on him. And the group of 6, they became brave. The group of 6 became brave to the point that they circle him and start taunting him. They do this to a man who has done nothing, absolutely nothing to them. Then, when that man, Mr. Miu, tries to create some space between him and Madison Cohen, they pounce. They punch him. They push him. They slap him. They hit him again. They choke him from all directions. And Nick Miu acts in self-defense. That's what happened on July 30th, 2022. I just want to give you guys a little bit of an indication as to kind of where I'm going to go, and more importantly, what I think you need to think about when you are back there thinking about the evidence, okay? First is the law. 1, there is no duty to retreat, period. That is the only requirement. In this state, bullies like Madison Cohen don't get to tell us where to go. Bullies like Madison Cohen don't get to get in our face and require that we leave. That's not a requirement here. Keep that in mind. 2, subjective beliefs, okay? When you're listening to or contemplating the evidence and replaying it in your mind, you are to do that and consider the beliefs, not the actions, but the beliefs of Mr. Miu. And when you do that, you are to do that from his perspective at the time that the events were occurring. So while we have a video, that video is from the perspective of Juwan Cockfield. The video perspective that the jury is required to consider it is as Nick Miu is holding the camera. I'm going to address this a little bit later, but the idea of provocation. Whether or not Nick intentionally caused harm to Madison Cohen. That is something that you should consider when you're considering provocation. And the other main one I want to talk about is what it means, because it's different here, beyond a reasonable doubt. So normally, beyond a reasonable doubt is this hurdle, and the state has to jump that hurdle in order to prove a case. It's a little bit different here, okay? Because in this case, self-defense has been alleged. Remember when you're back there, Nick Miu doesn't have to prove he acted in self-defense. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he didn't act in self-defense. They have to prove that his beliefs were unreasonable. Okay? So, the way that I look at this video, the main video of Juwan Cockfield, we've all seen the 9-second video where he's screaming at Mr. Miu, calling him a raper. I'm not talking about that one. I'm talking about the video that you've seen probably more than you want to. But I'm breaking that up into really 3 parts, okay? 0 to 149 is the first part, all right? Before anything actually happens in terms of the attack. And what is in dispute in that first minute and 49 seconds? I think 2 things were raised in the case that were in dispute. And that is, first, whether or not these drunk teens were actually afraid of Mr. Miu, right? I think to a person, they testified, yeah, we were really concerned about Mr. Miu. And you get to use your everyday experiences in life when you decide what to believe. Does that look to you like teenagers who are afraid of that person? Is that what that looks like to you? Does this photo of drunk teenagers taunting him, does that make you believe in your experiences in life? They're not afraid. They want to see how this is going to play out. And Juwan Cockfield said it best of all. It's for the culture. He wanted to put it on the internet so other people could see it. And when you're using your everyday experiences in life, ask yourself this. Do people who are afraid of other people, do they walk up on them? Is that what people do when you're afraid of someone? Or do you try to get away from them? If you're afraid of someone, do you taunt them? Do you call them names? Do you circle around them? Those are questions that you all can answer. Or, an alternative hypothesis to them being terrified is, do they do those things because they're drunk teenagers and what they want to do is make a video and put it on the internet? Which one of those 2 things, based on the evidence that you've seen, which one of those things makes more sense to you? I would submit to you that what kind of person does what these kids did to him, and what would they look like as people if all they did was pick a guy out and start to torment him? What do we think of people who do that? What do we think of people who call grown men rapers and pedophiles and predators for kicks? What do we think of those people? They had to come in and say that. Because if they don't, we know what we think of them. That's the reason they came in. And they said this to you guys under oath. They got on that witness stand and swore to tell the truth. And they told you that he said he was looking for little girls. Well, the cops got up under oath and told you, no, they never mentioned that to me. But I want to talk about what we know in that first minute and 49 seconds of the video. What do we know? We know, based on the evidence, that Nick's looking for a phone. We know that. Ariel said that, Nick said that. They find Ariel's phone in the river, so we know that. We know that Nick comes up to the teenager's tubes, and we know that Cockfield's looking for a phone, and Cockfield's holding the phone. Joanne Cockfield's holding the phone. We know that Nick Miu walks away from them as he passes them. We know that. We know, right, that the drunk teenagers move toward him and start confronting him. We know that. We also know that Nick sees what he believes to be a reasonable, rational adult. So he heads over there to talk to her. And what we know is you can see his thumb. He's motioning back, trying to explain what happened. And we know that Madison Cohen, who knows nothing about what happened, zero, starts screaming at him to leave. We know that Madison Cohen feels comfortable enough to put her hands on him for the first time and move him because, well, she's queen of the river and she decides where people go. So she's moving him. We know that. We know that Nick is uncomfortable, so he waves for his group to come over because the state can say whatever they want. He's by himself. So we know Nick does that. We know that when Nick waves to his group, so does Madison Cohen. But there's one big difference here. Her group shows up. And they show up in numbers. He doesn't have to go, and there's nowhere to go. That should be the beginning, middle, and end of that evaluation on retreat. Same analysis, same result on provocation. Okay? You have to find that Nick Miu committed an unlawful conduct against Madison Cohen to provoke this attack. He wanted her to get out of his personal space. The bully in the room doesn't get to yell at you and tell you to leave, and then when you don't leave, doesn't get to get in your personal space because you're not leaving. That's not how this works. Alex Vang told you. Miu's getting his butt kicked when this is going on. And Owen Peliquin said those guys got on his ass. Right? Anthony Carlson is yelling, stop, stop, stop. He's not yelling it to Nick Miu. Nick Miu's tail down in the water. Presumably, he's telling it to the people who are beating him. Right? That's what we know. Right? This 52-year-old engineer who's married just lost his mind that day. Those are the two options I think that you have on that. And the final thing that you need to decide is whether or not his beliefs were reasonable. And the standard is, would a person of ordinary intelligence and prudence would have believed standing in his shoes at that moment. Okay? Quentin Carlson is about his age. And Quentin Carlson is concerned enough for his safety that he sends his boys over. Quentin Carlson tells the police that after his boys have been injured. He tells the police, I get it, they're injured. I sent them over there because I was concerned for the old guy. Brandy Hart. Did you watch that video yesterday? There's a point in that video where Nick Miu puts his hand in his head and says something like, "My life is over." And Brandy Hart says, "I don't know about that. There's self-defense." She says, "I don't know what I would have done. But I can tell you I would have been scared shitless." She's been a police officer for 25 years. And that is her response. State never followed up with her on anything after that. That was her statement to the police. Or that was her statement on the tape. And as I mentioned, Alex Vang and Owen Peliquin say he's getting his butt kicked. They're all over him. Are those reasonable people? You get to decide what a reasonable person would do in that situation. But I would submit to you, you've got something to work with. You've got something to work with. Briefly on the charges, okay? Before you even get to self-defense, you get to intent. You have to find intent on the homicide charges initially for Isaac Schumann, and you have to find him for the others involved, okay? You don't have to let somebody beat you before you respond. Doesn't that make sense? And because they don't have the attempts here, because there was no outside extraneous factor, they also say, might not be attempts, take a chance on reckless. How about that? Again, not really a theory, but you get to make that decision. I'm going to comment on the video, because I think it's appropriate, that was played, the interview with Nick and Brandy Hart. He lies about the knife. He lies about the knife. What Lieutenant Hart said is he's never wavered on is that this was self-defense. And I just want you guys to know this. When you go back there and you have those verdict forms, if you believe it's self-defense, he's not guilty. If you believe it's probably self-defense, he's not guilty. If you believe it's possibly self-defense, he's not guilty. If you're like, it likely is, I don't know, not guilty. If you believe it might not be, not guilty. If you believe it's probably not self-defense, not guilty. All of those considerations that you would have require a verdict of not guilty. Because the state has to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that it wasn't self-defense.